The works of Yuko Tatsushima are often misunderstood by the majority of people who view them. This artist is mysterious in nature. We only really know a few things about her, and yet her art is so evocative, disturbing, and entrancing that some smaller Reddit or YouTube communities often discuss her work, citing how terrifying and malignant her subjects appear. I feel, however, that these paintings tell a different story. The subject in her paintings are not to be feared. What happened to them, however, is. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be discussing the works of Yuko Tashima through a sexuality and sexual assault lens. I am not the first to have made this comparison by any means. There are a few articles online about it, and I kind of want to take a bit of a deeper dive into it. A lot of the articles I've seen will say, oh, there's a connection, but they don't go into why or what the stories might be. I am in no way an art student or anything, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. On top of that, all art is subjective. I'm not saying that any of the meanings I garner from the paintings are what is intended by the artist. I'm simply commenting on what I see, how I interpret the symbols, and the sort of narrative that it paints in my head. All of the work in this video is coming straight from her website, which I will link in the description. All I've added is censoring for YouTube because there's a lot of nudity in her art. A lot of the pictures are blurry and like low resolution, so I am sorry about that, but I can only present the art as it's been uploaded to the website, so I can't really do anything about how pixelated it looks. As mentioned, Yuko is quite hard to get information about. We can only really get it through her website, which is in Japanese. It's fairly well known at this point that she was born in Tokyo in 1974, and she graduated from the Joshibi University of Art and Design Department of Painting, major in Western painting, printmaking courses. Apparently. That's a lot of courses. She shows other art mediums at her website, such as puppetry and photography, but I'm going to be focusing solely on her painting today. Two words that I use quite a lot in this video are dissociation and depersonalization, so going forward I thought it would be useful to include a definition of both those words just for your own reference. The definition of dissociation is the action of disconnecting or separating, or the state of being disconnected. So for a psychological based thing, it's kind of the idea of completely disconnecting from the world, being in your own bubble. It's that idea of kind of staring off into space and completely just forgetting about the outside world. You're in your own head a lot of the time as a trauma response. Depersonalization is quite similar in the way that it's very psychological and in your own head. The definition is the action of divesting someone or something of its human characteristics or individuality. So a lot of the time that kind of looks like having a little bit of like a crisis, an internal crisis of being like, I don't know who I am, I don't feel real, I don't feel like a person. It's once again quite a common trauma response. I don't want to come across as patronising or anything, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows what these things are before I go on, because I understand that if you're not as active in like mental health communities, these aren't necessarily common things to know. A few of you may recognise this painting as Tamino's Hell, but you would be wrong. The painting is actually called I Can't Be a Wife Anymore. Tamino's Hell is a creepypasta about a cursed poem, and a close-up of the painting is used as its accompanying image. This is where I and a lot of others were introduced to our work. This close-up, however, is a discredit to the original piece in my opinion. I could make a whole other video about creepypastas misusing art, often without the credit given to the artists. This painting features a female subject lying down wearing a kimono that is pushed up and bloodstained. The look on her face is haunting, but in my opinion it's not threatening. Her face is almost childlike and has a look of derangement upon it. It almost looks like she's reached breaking point. The kimono is traditional Japanese wear that is often known for its beauty and modesty. It's been pushed up and unbuttoned, perverted in order to sexualize a womanly figure, contrasting quite heavily with the younger looking face. Her hands seem small and obscure, perhaps showing a lack of power over her situation and paralysed state. Blood drips from her crotch, and it seems implied that she was just sexually assaulted. I say sexually assaulted, but the other word I just don't want to use, the R word, for the sake of YouTube coming after me. So when I say sexually assaulted, a lot of the time you can assume that what I mean is the R word. This is evidenced further by her lying down position. The name itself can imply two narratives, both equally powerful. I can't be a wife anymore perhaps suggests a realisation of her perceived impurity after sexual assault, perpetuating the societal belief that women who have been sexually assaulted are seen as dirty or unfit to be wed. It could also be commentary on marital sexual assault, something that's not often discussed. She may be convinced that intercourse, whether wanted or not, is part of her wifely duties, and the painting title may be an exclamation of her breaking point. The scratchy technique used for the painting and landscape is hell-like, and perhaps a product of detachment from reality through dissociation. Tamino's hell as a creepypasta may be nostalgic for many, but one can't deny the importance and depth of the painting when shown in its entirety. The next painting is called Girl in a Box and is a personal favourite of mine that I don't see being discussed as often. It features a girl in childlike clothing stuffed into a box with strung pearls and bows surrounding her. Her dress seems to be getting too small for her and is pushed up similarly to the last painting. The bows and pearls around her symbolise purity, innocence, and beauty. The pearls especially are a sign of purity in both Japanese and Western symbology. The main symbol in this painting, in my opinion, is the box. The box may be sexuality, and the struggle to fit in and resist that box is one that I'm sure a lot of women can sympathise with. The contrasting need to present as sexual and promiscuous often conflicts with the desire to stay innocent and pure, especially in the transition between girlhood to womanhood, which is about the age I would guess the figure is. Her hand wraps around the box painfully, showing the often damaging desire to fit into the box of sexuality that society can demand. Her face mirrors this pain, but is smiling through it, perhaps trying to grin and bear it in a way that still looks pretty, despite the tired bags under her eyes. Her legs are unnaturally clenched together, protecting her vulnerability and possibly virginity, contrasting with the smile on her face, reinforcing the idea that it is a fake smile. The last important symbol of the painting is the rose, the universal sign of beauty, covering her chest which would otherwise be exposed as her dress is unbuttoned. A running theme in these paintings is a wound or hole in the chest, perhaps her chest is wounded too, but despite that her beauty is being used to cover this wound. Roses have thorns, perhaps suggesting that to remove the association of beauty with breasts is painful. Overall, I believe this image to be a representation of the struggles when transitioning to a woman. All semblance of innocence is ripped away, shown around you as you struggle with the need to be in the box, sexualised and worthy, or out of the box, safe and pure. All while trying to retain your sense of self and dignity. Funnily enough, my girlfriend pointed out to me that this reminded her of American Beauty, specifically the imagery in this scene where a man fantasizes about his daughter's underage friend. That movie could also be seen as about the sexualization of a child going through the transition to womanhood, so I think it's an interesting comparison that kind of brings back the point of what I interpret to be the painting. Bubble Flower is almost compositionally a direct opposite of Girl in a Box. She stands upright, holding herself open for the viewer to see, chest completely exposed and face demure. Despite this contrast, it could be argued that Bubble Flower is a sequel of Girl in a Box, at least from a symbolical standpoint. The hole in her chest may represent a recent heartbreak or bout of grief, further evidenced by the bloody bandage on her wrist, presumably covering scars of self-harm. Her body is uncomfortably contorted, and she holds herself open and vulnerable, literally spreading her legs, perhaps as an attempt to seem attractive or worthy despite recent heartbreak. This is further evidenced by the daisies next to her. In Japan, white daisies are a symbol of love, but they're presented to us here as wilted. I'm less sure about this, but the other symbols next to her look like lotus flowers. Lotus flowers symbolically represent beauty coming through mud, or in this case perhaps sexualization through trauma. That one's maybe a slight reach compared to the others, but I thought it was worth bringing up. Her face looks tired yet determined, perhaps convinced that this is the way things have to be. One side of her face is rotting. At first I thought of this as depersonalization, but maybe if you take a more optimistic approach it could be seen as a necessary rotting and degeneration before rebirth. A rebirth that hopefully may include a greater sense of self-worth. The idea of rebirth may be further emphasised by the compositional similarity to the birth of Venus. As the shell is used as a mean of transporting Venus to her birth, the opening of herself may be a way of lending the woman to her rebirth. The title of this one is a little simpler, and I believe it to just mean fragile beauty. Bubbles are about as fragile as you can get, and flowers are a symbol of beauty pretty much worldwide, so I think it translates rather directly in this case. The reason I say this could be a symbolic sort of sequel to the last painting is because I believe this painting to be a representation of over-sexualization as a coping mechanism through trauma. She holds herself apart, welcoming anyone to take advantage of her just after her heart has been wounded. Perhaps this is the result of forcing yourself into the box. White prison at first glance is a bit less vulnerable in comparison to the ones we've looked at so far, yet its message is just as evocative. A girl kneels on what is presumably her bed in a well-decorated room, gazing up at the ceiling while she seemingly transforms. She once again has her shirt unbuttoned and a wound in her chest, and her face looks almost possessed, while her teeth are gritted in what I assume is pain, perhaps in throes of grief, clearly in anguish. Her nightdress is adorned in bows, once again giving the idea of innocence and childlike countenance. Her leg appears to have self-harm scars, and her hand is completely transforming. It's becoming doll-like, perhaps so that it's easier and posable for the sake of others' pleasure, perhaps as a symbol of her depersonalization. The environment in this painting is more detailed than the others. Her bed looks warm and symbolises the comfort of home, as does her incense. The flowers around her look to me like tiger lilies, which in Japan are used as a symbol of prosperity and home comforts. The sign next to her is a bit of a mystery. I asked the Translate subreddit to help me figure out what it meant in English. However, the quality of the image only made some of it legible. The most that they could decipher was April the 8th and Buddhist women. I'm showing the reply so you can read it in full, but I have censored their name as I don't have permission to share it. All credit for that translation goes to them. Since we can't make the rest of it out, I won't really talk about it too much, but it does seem to provide a religious angle, something that we see more of later in Yuko's works. It's unclear whether the grief in this painting is due to something like sexual assault. However, in the context of her other works, the wounded chest and her unbuttoned nightdress, I would presume so. Either way, this painting seems to show someone being so consumed by anguish that they cannot thrive like the rest of their prosperous environment. Despite all the comforts of home, the internal pain is still immense, maybe even too much to bear. Lookout of Blood seems like more of her more abstract works. A limbless figure with a deformed face sits next to a hand, praying to what looks like a representation of a biblically accurate angel. Whether or not this is a Christian angel is unknown. I don't know enough about different religions to properly theorise what exactly this figure is, but I do think it's safe to assume that it is a holy figure of some type. Either way, the figure seems to look on without doing much to help the situation. This is further enhanced by the title using the word lookout. It gives the impression that despite all the prayer and pain that the figure goes through, they're simply observed instead of helped. Perhaps this is a take on religion or even society, often turning a blind eye to things like sexual assault or rape, content to simply watch on and ignore pleas for help. It might just be me, but the woman's contorted face kind of reminds me of a Picasso painting. The misplaced eyes and mouth provide some of that same theme of depersonalization. It may be worth noting that there is a smiling mouth almost stitched over the woman's normal mouth, which seems to be in a grimace. Her limbless body once again shows a lack of power in her situation, and the stitched-up scars indicate she's felt this type of pain before. Her genitals are once again blood-smeared, a common theme in these paintings. The blood looks bright red and particularly fresh. This painting has a lot of similar themes to the others, with the added religious imagery to it. It reads to me as an interpretation of what is left of a woman after sexual assault, at least in the victim's eyes. She feels powerless, scared, confused. She may pray for help or forgiveness, but is ultimately observed, yet left to deal with her trauma on her own. Six-string Shalizia is a little bit different and feels a bit more particular about the imagery and story it conveys. We see a woman grasping onto a guitar with a large eye watching on. It once again reminds me a little of a biblically accurate angel because of the eye, but there's not too much evidence to support exactly what it is. The title of this one gave me a bit more trouble than the others. The guitar has 6 strings, so that part's easy. However, a Shalizia is the name of a bird of paradise plant, which doesn't seem to have much to do with the painting. I did a little research and found some makes of cellos also have that name, and some orchestras, but most results seemed a little bit too vague to properly be evidenced of anything. I also did a little research and found some makes of cellos also have that name and some orchestras, but most results were too vague to really give evidence to anything. We can deduce from the rest of the title and painting that it is musical, however. Some of the usual themes are presented in this painting. The woman is naked and seems to have blood smeared on her lower half. Her face is particularly evocative. She looks simultaneously in pain and yet in ecstasy. Her expression is overall bittersweet. A red arm embraces her. It looks demonic. This arm may be coming from the figure overlooking or from the guitar itself. There's clearly a tie to music here, and when I first looked at it, I was immediately reminded of the old saying, "a deal with the devil." This concept is a long-running one, especially for musicians, and from that concept I developed my impression of the painting. To me, this seems to be an interpretation of the sexualization of women in the music industry. The figure being naked and the blood seems to show how the woman has sacrificed herself sexually for success in her music career. The devil embracing her paints the sacrifice that many female artists go through as a deal with the devil. Her expression then makes a lot more sense. The success may make her happy, and regardless if it does, she must appear that way to the public. Yet inside she's torn, discouraged by what she has had to sacrifice to make her heart successful. At the top of the guitar, we see an almost holy light. With my interpretation of the painting in mind, this seems to show how music itself, while intrinsically an innocent and pure hobby, can always be perverted by the patriarchal industry that dominates it, or in other words, the devil. The next painting, 8 Seconds of Original Sin, seems to bring back the religious angle to Yuko's work. This painting is probably the most simple one in the video. A woman is shown from the waist up and seems to look down in anguish despite the smile on her face. For the most part, the name of this work is where we can derive some sort of narrative. For those of you that don't know, the original sin is the sin Eve committed by eating the apple in the Garden of Eden. The concept of the original sin being used as a device to oppress women is widely talked about, with the main argument being that by Eve simply giving in to her desires against the will of 2 male figures, God and Adam, she's completely banished and dehumanized into the perpetrator of the original sin, with no mercy or nuance. Taking that into account, this painting seems to show the oppression of a woman after giving in to her desires. Due to the nature of all their other works, I would guess these desires were sexual in nature. It's my interpretation that this painting seems to be a representation of shame around sexuality. Many of the other paintings seem to represent a form of sexual assault. However, this one seems to be the view of a woman after she willingly gave in to her desires, and the shame that may come with that. Another thing to note on the original sin is that despite the devil, another male figure, tempting Eve into taking a bite of the apple, he doesn't seem to be acknowledged much by God. Eve, the only female figure in the situation, is the only one that blame's put upon. In the context of the picture, we can assume that her shame, despite probably partaking in her desires with someone else, falls entirely on her shoulders. The woman seems to smile as a front, but her eyes look down in shame. For the most part, the figures in Yuko's painting seem to look right at us, but not this one. She seems particularly unwilling to show her vulnerability, shying away from the viewer. The further you look away from this painting, the easier it is to just see it as a woman smiling. It's not until you get closer that you see the true disgust and humiliation in her eyes, and her teeth gritted in an attempt to stay silent. The last painting I want to talk about is Red Laughter, a compositionally simple painting with, in my opinion, the most evocative figure. The woman grins widely at the viewer, yet she is crying and her eyes betray her true despair. This is another painting that in particular gets called scary, with many people commenting that the figure looks on with intent to harm, or relish in our despair. And respectfully, I couldn't disagree more. Look into this woman's eyes and tell me what you see as joy, because all I see is anguish, anger, frustration, hopelessness, all hidden behind a wide smile, desperately trying to convince the viewer that they're fine, they're happy, they're coping. I personally use humour as a big coping mechanism for every bad thing that's ever happened to me. I'm quite open about saying it. It's a way to make myself seem more bearable. I purposely hide my vulnerability through laughter in an attempt to make my grief more amusing to others, because it's seen as less of a bother then. If I can make my grief or unhappiness funny for people to hear about, then they're not going to get fed up of me when I vent about it. That's exactly the kind of energy I get from this painting, and probably why I identify with this one the most. Her hair is colourful and bright, yet fades into the background no matter how loud it is. This gives a sense of dissociation and fading into the background no matter how extravagantly you may present yourself. Her eyes look directly at the viewer in direct contrast to the last painting, show her vulnerability almost fully in a plea for help. One of her eyes is missing. Eyes are usually referred to as windows to the soul. In that context, the missing eye feels like a loss of identity, through grief. It may also correlate to her being literally blindsided by her trauma. Overall, this painting gives us the least to work with in a narrative sense, but emotionally encompasses almost every feeling a sexual assault survivor may feel. It almost ties all of her work together. This painting shows the traumatic impact of I can't be a wife anymore, the conflicting emotions of girl in a box, the grief of white prison, the helplessness of Lookout with Blood, the sense of sacrifice in Sexuality, and the encompassing shame in 8 Seconds of Original Sin. The figures in Yuko Tatsushima's paintings aren't scary. The real traumatic events that inspire them, however, are. As I said, everything in this video is my interpretation of the paintings. However, I don't think their relation to sexuality in women can really be disputed. The common theme in these paintings are naked female figures in anguish in a scratchy landscape, often blood-covered and scared. If that doesn't scream sexual assault, I don't know what does. And I find it weird that so many viewers don't seem to see that in these paintings. As I said, I'm definitely not the first one to draw these connections. However, around half the commentary I see about Yuko's work is talking about how scary and evil these women look. And isn't it telling that these paintings representing women after rape or sexual assault, that many commentators, unfortunately usually men, immediately demonise the women as they seem too emotional or disfigured to sympathise with? That's certainly not to say every man misses the point, but too many of them do. That's not just my opinion, it's logistically true that most people who have this view of her work are male. I've seen a lot of male commentators or journalists talking about her work, and they all seem to be scared of the figures. They are entitled to that view. All art is completely subjective. But by looking at these paintings and deeming them scary and moving on, you're missing out on the tragic beauty of Yuko's work. Do yourself a favour, go to her website, like I said it will be in the description, and browse some of her art yourself. The ones I show today are simply my favourite paintings out of a plethora of paintings, puppetry and photography that she has on her website. Look at her work and ask yourself, who, what, where, when, why? Who are you staring at? What emotions are you seeing? What could have happened to evoke them? Where are these people? You know, really delve into it, swim in the images and get a sense of who the person you're looking at is. By seeing these paintings as just depictions of monsters, you're doing a disservice to Yuko's work and to yourself. You deserve to see how beautiful these paintings are for yourself. You deserve to be able to swim in that artwork and take in every little piece of narrative that's been given to you. You deserve to be able to feel how evocative and beautiful her art is. So I read Frankenstein recently because it's on the Disturbing Book Iceberg, which I'm doing videos on as well. And I couldn't help but kind of relate back to this work because of it. It's that idea of like seeing the monster being scared, running away, immediately not talking or interacting with it. That's kind of the sense I get from these pictures. It's like so many people look at them and just go, oh, that's a scary image. Oh, she looks scary. Oh, she looks like she's going to hurt me. She looks malignant in some way. And they don't actually take a minute to say, why is she naked? Why is there blood on her? Why is she here? Why does she look so sad? You know, it's just... I think that it's just a shame that so many people take a quick glance and then just leave. I know that this was a bit of a different video and a little bit of a heavier topic. However, I do want to do like video essays on my channel that aren't just the Disturbing Book Iceberg as much as that's like my main thing. So discussing art is something that I really like to do. I'm not nearly cool enough to be an art student. So I don't really know what I'm talking about too much in terms of technique. However, the best thing about art is it's subjective, so I can basically take whatever I want from it emotionally and in terms of a narrative and present it to you as just my opinion. I hope you guys enjoyed this little bit of a different video. I'm going to see what different artworks I can look into because I enjoy talking about them and that's what really matters. So thanks once again for watching and I will see you in the next video.